Now before we get started, I do have this one caveat. Pickling and canning techniques have really developed a lot since the 18th century. This is an 18th century technique, and if you use it, I recommend storing your pickled onions in the refrigerator. There are many 18th century recipes for pickled onions. This particular one is from Sarah Harrison's 1739 cookbook, The Housekeepers Pocketbook. Onions were a very important vegetable in the 18th century. If the plantings were staggered properly, a family could have onions virtually year-round. We're using pearl onions, and pearl onions would have been picked early and laid out to dry or to cure for a couple of weeks. One recipe suggests that Spanish onions would be great for this recipe. We're going to pickle enough onions to fit in our small lidded stoneware jar. If you're pickling a larger quantity, you may want to use one of our 1 quart or 2 quart stoneware crocks. Master potter Gary Nieder makes these jars for us, and they are available on our website or in our print catalog. I'll put a link down in the description section below. Now you can peel these if you wish by hand, but I'm going to show you an easier method that's discussed in some other 18th century recipes. Put your onions in a pan of cold water and set them over the fire, and as soon as they come to a boil, remove them from the fire, strain them, and allow them to cool completely. If you cut the root section off of your onions after they've cooled, then you can squeeze them right out of the outer layers. Now that our onions are ready, it's time to put together our pickle. Now there were 2 schools of thought on vinegar in the 18th century for this kind of recipe. They would either call for distilled vinegar or they would call for white wine vinegar. Now don't be confused about the term white wine vinegar in this recipe. The 18th century cookbooks were actually very explicit about this topic. White wine vinegar in the 18th century was not made with wine, like some things that you will find today, but it was made with malt. So we're using malt vinegar today. If you can't find malt vinegar, then you can use distilled vinegar. It just won't have as much flavor. I put my vinegar in a non-reactive saucepan. Today I'm using one of our pipkins. I'll put a link down in the description section of this video. There are a number of seasonings that you can use in your pickle. Most of the recipes called for using salt. Harrison's recipe does not actually call for salt, but we're going to use some. Make sure to use kosher salt or pickling salt, definitely not iodized salt. In addition to about 1 ounce of salt, you want 1/2 teaspoon of peppercorns, 3 or 4 whole cloves, about 1 tablespoon of thinly sliced fresh ginger. Adding some bay leaves or broken up nutmeg might be an interesting addition too. We're going to set this over the fire until it comes to a boil, and then we're going to let it cool completely. These will take about 10 days to pickle, and again, make sure to store them in your refrigerator. So here are some that have been prepared in advance, and let's give them a try. That was delicious. These would be great for a garnish or even all by themselves. These are wonderful. There were many different kinds of pickled vegetables in the 18th century so that they would be able to, preserve things the whole year round. But I can understand why these are still popular today.